apparently we're live, so let's get started. Thank you all for joining us first this evening for the very first ever African Bush Camps Safari Talks. I think we're going to have some very informative discussion today, and we're looking at the unusual topic of, obviously, the COVID virus and is all around us, but how is that going to affect wildlife, African wildlife, and the reserves that it's living in? It's probably something you haven't thought about before, because we're all so bothered about ourselves as humans. But are the animals going to suffer? It's going to be an interesting discussion, I think, and we have three industry experts with us today. First of all, we've got Bex and Lovo. I'm going to introduce everyone first and then get them into the subject. But if you can just, guys, if you can just let us know that you're online and you can hear us. So first of all, we've got Bex and Lovo, who is the founder and CEO of African Bush Camps. Bex, are you there?
I'm there. Thanks very much, Leslie.
Excellent. Good to have you here. Then we've also got Orbit Manyeka, who is the head of African Bush Camps Charitable Foundation, which looks after the people who live in the communities around all the camps. Orbit?
Hi, Leslie.
Good, excellent.
Yes, I'm here, thanks.
Excellent. And then we've got Mark, who is phoning in from Zimbabwe up by Kariba. Yeah, Mark?
Correct, Bumi Hills, Kariba.
Excellent. So that's Mark Brightman, who is who's really on the front line of conservation, because he is in the anti-poaching units up at Kariba Dam in Zimbabwe. So, but first of all, before I introduce all the guys properly, everybody who's watching, it's going to be great if you will get involved. You can post your comments on Facebook and any questions that you've got. And if we don't get around to answering all the questions today, they'll be fed through to the team and they can give us some answers later. So let's make it interactive. I know you've got nowhere else to be right now, so let's have a good conversation and really unpack some nice issues. So Bex, let me start by introducing you. So you started out as a tour guide in Zimbabwe, then you went on to create your own camp, and it's now an award-winning safari lodge. And since that was 13 years ago, hey? And since then, the company now has 15 lodges scattered throughout Zambia, Zimbabwe, and Botswana. And they're all really concerned with uplifting the local communities and supporting conservation, not just by creating jobs, but by pumping money into the villages around them through the foundation. So Bex, what's the situation on the ground right now? I know you were quick to introduce health and safety measures to keep the lodges running. Have you now had to close them and send people home, or is there a skeleton staff? What's the situation?
Thank you very much, Leslie. If you had this conversation with me about 3 months ago, I think I would have considered it a very far-fetched conversation. But as you say, we've had to respond pretty much right away as things unfolded. And thankfully, we started on this quite early with already alerting staff and making sure that we put in place systems of alerting our staff in the camp so that they knew what was going on. You can imagine for a lot of our staff in this very remote location with very little access to news internationally, what's going on. It was important to get them on sites and let them know what was going on in the rest of the world. And again, that kind of explanation to a lot of people in the communities is still relatively far-fetched. So with that in place, we wanted to make sure that we had the confidence of the industry and the trade that if they were sending people onto our lodges or any of our remote safari camps, that they were going into a situation where we're aware and the health and safety of our own people to begin with, and secondly, our visitors visiting them was a high priority. Obviously, things escalated and the dynamics of that changed pretty rapidly to a point where our countries had in place restrictions of certain source markets, especially our key ones. And of course, the travel restrictions also kicked in those source markets, which basically means we've got empty camps as we sit here today. We haven't closed them down because these facilities need to stay open, otherwise they'll go down to ruins. And also we want to make sure that our staff stay motivated and have an asset that they need to protect and keep But fundamentally, we also have a responsibility to the environment and ongoing education to our communities to make sure that we don't completely lose the resource during this difficult period.
Goodness me. So, do you feel quite gloomy about the whole thing, or how do you mentally deal with that?
Well, do we feel gloomy about it? I think it's a very difficult situation that we acknowledge is it's really terrible, not just for us, but for globally, and particularly for communities who depend on wildlife. So our immediate priority really is to say, what can we make sure, having seen all the good that tourism can do on the face of conservation and uplifting communities, as we've done over the last 15 years, what are our priorities and what is the single biggest focus during this period of time that we can do to really make a difference? So really it's to ensure that we can retain as many jobs as possible, and that we can afford some kind of income to the people that we retain, and then make sure that we're engaging with our communities even on a stronger note than we ever have, but also making sure that our vulnerable areas remain intact, because it's at this time where people will be desperate with lower levels of income and earning, and we need to step up and make sure that we protect these vulnerable areas.
That's a nice point for bringing in Albert. For you, you're head of the foundation and the manager of the foundation's trust fund. Now, the foundation is funded by African bush camps because it donates $10 for every night that every person spends in any of its camps. Now, that's been a good, solid stream of money for many years, and it's allowed you to support 42 different community organizations. So can you tell us a little bit first about how the community works, some of the schemes that it gets involved in, and then what's it like now the income has suddenly and utterly stopped? That must be fairly bleak.
Yeah, well, yeah, thanks a lot for that, Leslie. Yeah, maybe just to get us started, I think as already alluded to by Bex, the main purpose of the foundation is really to partner the local communities in and around the national parks where we run the camps or operations. So, hello?
Yes, we can still hear you.
Yes, sure. Okay,
yeah.
No, that's fine. So the main purpose of the foundation is then to ensure that the communities get to realize benefits from the activities or that the company and the camps are involved in. So we go out there, sit with the communities, come up with specific baselines and needs in terms of what they would like supported with. And one of the key issues that we have been working on has been mainly in the three areas of education, conservation, and the community empowerment. So you can imagine if you are working with education, we have been running, for example, a feeding scheme for children during the school days and during their lunchtime, they have a meal. But that on its own is abruptly stopped. We're not too sure whether the kids are getting a decent meal at home, because for them, they were coming to school and they were looking forward to this very decent meal at lunchtime. But also beyond that, we're looking at the issue to say, are we going to be able to sustain that beyond this period that we are in? Are we going to be able to look at that? So the support that we've been getting from African bush camps, mainly through the bed nights, has basically been running most of the projects we have been doing in the communities. But now that the bed night has stopped coming, we are hanging on. We have a few partners. We have put some money together in the past, and we are still trying to implement those projects. Unfortunately, at the moment, everything has kind of come to a halt because of the lockdowns in the three countries. But essentially, we have seen a lot of concerns coming from the communities, particularly in terms of the support that we were giving them, which has kind of come to an end. However, we have gone ahead and put in place support towards the communities, mainly looking at the boreholes. We already have existing boreholes. We are trying to pass the message around COVID-19. within those sectors. But again, it's a bit difficult trying to manage communities in terms of when and how they collect water from such points. But we have kind of started off on that level.
Got it, yeah. So, and do you get funding? You're saying you get funding from other sources. So African Bush Camps isn't the only supplier. So there is money coming in, but on a much smaller scale.
Yes. So a lot of the funding that we have had has come through our partners who are either agents who are working with African Bush Camps, or partners who have been guests at our camps and to the communities and have come on board to support the communities. So we have 40% of our funding is coming from the partners and 60% is coming from the company. So that stream of income, unfortunately, means it has to go down depending on the circumstances that the particular individuals are in the source markets or in the countries where they come from. Sadly, we've had one or two of the donor partners actually coming to us to say, look, I think for now, we will have to reconsider our position as soon as we are done with the lockdown.
Oh yeah, oh, that's sad. Okay.
Yes.
Well,
however, we have also engaged the company on this issue, and they have committed to supporting to ensure that all our projects that we're currently running can be seen through. In fact, we have some funds that have been set aside, and we have started tapping into that. And as soon as the lockdown is over, we have the project officers back on the ground to ensure that we see through all the commitments that we had with the different donors. I mean, I can give you, for example, we have funding to construct a classroom. The second classroom that we have constructed at a specific school is the second brick structure at that specific school with over 400 kids. But at the moment, it's on hold because of the current situation, and we are hopeful that after this, we'll be able to continue with that and provide a learning environment for the kids.
Gosh, it's interesting, isn't it? Because we get so wrapped up in our own lives and we can't go out, we can't do this, and we forget how the knock-on effects of this is affecting so many different people in so many ways. Now, I'd like to bring in Mark into the conversation now. Mark, you're based up at Kariba as the head of the anti-poaching unit there. What's the situation now? Can your patrol still go out and keep the poachers physically out of the ground? Can you go out and patrol and get the snares and basically make sure the animals are safe? What's the lockdown doing in that situation? And I think this is an important question, I think. Does the lack of tourists in the Kariba area and in all the other camps that we're talking about here, and in fact right across Southern Africa, does the lack of tourist traffic now mean that the poachers pretty much have the place to themselves? Could we see a massive surge in poaching?
Thanks, Leslie. Great to be here and to be involved with everyone. It will be a definite problem. We have similarly relied upon income from lodges at midnight levies and so on and so forth to support us. We are entirely self-funded, but we went through a similar situation in the mid-2000s, and we rose to that challenge, and we came through it, and we're hoping we're going to be able to do the same. Obviously, it's a different set of circumstances, but we are continuing as normal 24/7. We have continued. We operate with national parks and the army, so our patrols at this time are unaffected. We're seeing a dramatic rise already in the wire snaring of wild animals, which is understandable because of the economic situation, and now we have this lockdown, and it will be interesting to see how long it goes on for. It won't go on forever. We've just got to rise to that challenge, and that's what we intend to do.
I don't know which one of you would be the best to answer this. Maybe all three can have a go. I'm interested in whether the communities around the parks, and this goes right across Southern Africa, I think, the communities probably know where the animals hang out. They've got the income from the lodges and from tourism. They understand the bigger picture that keeping the wildlife alive brings in the tourist money through the revenue that people come in, the money they're spending on the local community. But now that's dried up. Is there a risk that the people on the edges of the safari park are going to turn into poachers, or I mean, for either for money or for just plain food because they're hungry? I mean, they may know the bigger picture, but hunger is a big driver. Is that what you're finding with the snares, Mark? That's what's happening?
We will see a definite increase, and we've had a big problem with elephant poaching in this area in the past. We've lost 75% of the elephant since 2006. We've managed to reverse that trend, and with the help of African Bush Camps and the ABC Foundation, who are doing a lot of awareness work in the communities, I think that's played a large part in lessening the effect. But we're going to have people that are going to be looking for a source of income, and the poaching of elephants and other animals are going to be one of the problems we're going to be faced with, most definitely.
Is there a solution?
I think we've just got to rise to the challenge. We've got to deal with it as best we can. This corona has come at a bad time, but we've just got to meet the challenge head on and deal with the situation. It's not going to go on forever, so let's just do what we can with what resources we have available.
Look, I think that's a very good point you bring on there, Leslie, and I think perhaps Orbit is most likely the most qualified person just to speak into our whole idea of bringing in these communities so that there isn't a disconnect between wildlife and the activities of tourism. I think it's very important to make sure that our communities completely buy in, and hence, you know, from an employment perspective, our catchment areas are these communities. So with everybody going back to their communities with what they have and what we've been able to do and take everybody along with us through this painful journey, hopefully is what will actually reward us in the end, ensuring that these areas are protected. But I would say that today's communities are more vulnerable than they've ever been before. And maybe we'll just let Obert speak a little bit into that.
Yeah, Obert, what are you finding the communities thinking about this?
Okay, so likely enough, beyond just the employment which has been alluded to, one of the key activities that we've been doing with the communities, particularly with the schools, are the conservation clubs or the conservation program, where they have already been involved in a lot of activities and are identifying with the tourism and the benefits that it brings to it. I mean, I can give you an example. In Zambia, we have used the resources to build a clinic. So even if we have a challenge, there is no way such a community might then abandon the clinic for something else. The same thing if we go to communities where we build classrooms, where we put boreholes, they realize the need to ensure that they look after the resource, but more importantly, the biggest resource being the wildlife around their areas of where they live. So we actually have at the moment a situation where a lot of them feel that yes, this is a current challenge, but are looking forward to the turn of events, which we hope will be soon. We have also kind of buttressed this approach through the projects that we do, particularly the income generating projects that the communities are involved in, and where the company, where the different operators have been getting material from and providing a source of income. Yes, at the moment that is kind of come to a halt, but again, it's important for us to continue engaging them. This is why we are now going back to say, look, let's support them, let's help them with issues around water provision. Let's ensure that they are able to access all the current COVID recommended health related issues, and then we support that. Then we go back to the initial issues that we had raised. We are very happy that a lot of the community members have also benefited from the scholarship programs that we have been running. We've had a lot of students coming out of that, and these students have been a very positive impact to their communities. So in some communities where the scholarship program has really worked. We're actually seeing a very positive response to that. I mean, I can tell you often that we already have students who have graduated at university level. Currently, we've got about 5 students who are at university that the foundation is paying tuition for and catering for their accommodation expenses. So that alone, for us, those are actually our ambassadors in the communities, and they're doing a lot of work to ensure that there is a positive image of the wildlife around them and ensuring that we conserve the wildlife.
Okay, and Bex, what's the situation with the guys who work for you? Have they gone away empty-handed, or are you paying the salaries while there is no work?
Yeah, thanks, Leslie. You know, we believe we've got over 600 people in the entire organization between the 4 countries where we have all our key people. And, you know, we appointed each and one of those positions because we felt that strategically we needed them for the growth of the business. So in light of that, we made a decision that we were going to keep every single job for the interim period. And so for the next 4 months, while we go through what we call the curl-up period, where really we're putting the camps into hibernation until the borders can open up, we have kept all the jobs and managed to save each of the employees' jobs. Because there is very little work, we have reduced most of our staff's time by at least 25% on the ground, but we've been able to have different categories of how much essential services do we need as a result of that, and then separate people into different clusters. But with that, and only having up to 25% of work, we are going to rotate our staff throughout the camps so that at least the camps have got some kind of presence, but also mobilize all our key senior staff, especially the guides, to continue to monitor and evaluate the areas where we operate. These are the people that we are now turning into custodians of wildlife to make sure that the incursions are not rife in all the areas that we operate. But we're also going a step further in ensuring that the learner guides coming into the system, and even some of the interested back of house staff, whether it be a waiter or any of the backroom staff, if they want to learn a little bit more about wildlife, they're getting involved and going on game drives and walks with a professional guide, and really trying to make sure we keep people stimulated and motivated to contributing during this period of time.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Custodians of wildlife. I like that. That's what we need. Mark, have things changed in terms of volume of poaching? You're saying that you're seeing more snares, but is there a danger that once tourists aren't here anymore, poachers will have more freedom to operate? Hopefully I'm wrong on thinking that.
I think most definitely it's a concern. If we haven't got the income, we'll have to scale back our operations. There will never be no one on the ground. We're just going to have to deal with it as time goes by. At the moment, we're secure, but who's to say in 2, 3, 4 months down the line what's going to happen? So it is of extreme concern, and it's a major threat that we're going to have to face. But at the moment, we're doing all we can, and so far so good. We're managing the problem as it stands at this present stage.
Okay. One thing I'm wanting to know is, has the virus actually reached these communities around the camps yet? Or are they thinking, well, this is some problem that's miles away from us, it has no relevance? Or, I mean, I can imagine the healthcare facilities aren't fabulous in some of these towns and villages. Is that a big worry for people, or a big worry for you guys? Bex, do you want to start that one?
Yeah, so Leslie, I think that they, you know, we need to acknowledge that the level of information going down to communities has been rather slow. We've done our bit in terms of trying to inform our staff, and then hopefully that cascades into the communities. I think the reality of people's earnings all of a sudden shrinking, and people going back to their communities because they don't have the volumes of work, that is really hit home. And you know, it is out there that this is real. It's not some far-fetched discussion or thing that's happening on somebody else's land. So I think that the communities are beginning to realize that this is a real issue, and starting to think what they can do in order to contribute. But we certainly have a very long way to go, given that there is not as much testing available to these communities. In fact, in all the countries that we operate, one of the biggest issues is the lack of testing in order to bring true results that then better inform the population what the status of the COVID-19 is. And hopefully this is something that's going to change with time. The one thing that we all talk about is that, of course, if you have zero testing, then you have zero infections. But thankfully, in our part of the world, so it appears, I'm not a scientist by any stretch of imaginations, but we've been very fortunate that this has hit us at a time where it's summer and temperatures are generally very high this time of the year, and perhaps that is what suppressed the spread of the coronavirus. But it's certainly something that is right up at the top of mind, and everybody's talking about it. So people are not oblivious to this.
Okay, good. Albert, what are you seeing?
So I think what we have seen is that the rural folk still has to go to the fields. They still have to attend to the daily needs. They still have to go to the water hole or to the borehole. They still have to take their cattle to the fields. So this has really also it's been an opportunity in the sense that people have been gathering and being able to discuss this in detail. But also the challenge with that is there is a tendency to prioritize trying to ensure you get food first as opposed to dealing with this. So again, these are interventions that we would like to continue to support and say, look, let's conscientize our communities. Let's spread as much information as possible. I'm quite impressed by a lot of the community organizations that have actually set up different platforms where they are speaking to their communities, where they are addressing through the local leadership, through the local chiefs, as well as through the local councillors, and they are trying to address the challenges around testing. Unfortunately, as also alluded to by Bex, a lot of the testing really happens centrally. So we might not quite be very sure of the figures, but we are, trying to ramp up everybody to support the issues of just making sure that there is access to all the alcohol-based sanitizers that we can get across to the communities so that they're able to use it. But again, with a lot of the communities, they would actually rather prefer the more bigger bar soap as opposed to sanitizers. So we're also working around that with the guidance of the local health facilities to help us come up with the best interventions. The information is slowly trickling in, that's for sure. It's trickling in, everybody is aware, but to what extent people are practicing it's really quite subjective at the moment because they will still have to go to the waterway, and for us, that's our biggest concern, the bore area.
Yeah. One thing, Mark, there's a question from a viewer, Shelley Cox. Thank you, Shelley, for joining us. Who wants to know? I'm going to add this onto a question I want to know. Wants to know what you need from viewers, how viewers can actually support the work that you're doing. In fact, I think that goes to Mark for the anti-poaching and to the foundation as well. There's a way viewers can get involved and can donate. What do you need? What do you need? What can people do? Mark, start with that one, please.
Thanks, Shelley. We're always in need of kits like backpacks, footwear, GPS, binoculars, and getting down to things like fuel. We all need fuel to get around in, both diesel and petrol and so on and so forth. So it all comes down to these sort of things that are pretty mundane, but it's essential that we have them in order to operate. Staff rations as well. We need to feed the units out in the field. Radio communications, we always need to improve upon what we have. So there's all these issues that we can look at about keeping a field team deployed.
And do you have a donation thingy? What would I call it? A donation facility? Orbit, do you have a donation facility for the foundation? If people are sitting here thinking, yeah, I really want to help here, how can they get the money to you?
Leslie,
No.
from our point of view, I think the easiest would be to go to Facebook, our Facebook page, where we have all our details logged on there. Also on Instagram. If they follow us on Instagram, it explains it all there.
Okay, excellent. One thing I want to know, Mark, this is, I don't know whether anyone's done the scientific research into this yet. Once tourism starts coming back into these areas, is there a risk that we could give the virus back to animals? And scientists are saying it's come to humans via bats, via pangolins. Is there a risk that this new mutation could infect the wildlife once people do start coming back? I'm thinking of the little vervet monkeys that play around the camp specs and the baboons. Is that something anyone's thought about yet?
If I could just start, I've seen a couple of reports in the press about tigers in zoos contracting corona. I don't know how true and factual it is. I don't think there's much chance of it happening here unless your guests are going to actually eat the wildlife. So I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. I may be wrong, but that's my personal opinion.
Oh, that's good. That's good news.
So
how long is it?
There are areas. So there are areas, not so much in Southern Africa where we are, but more of Central Africa, and in parts of East Africa where they've got other primates like your gorillas and your chimpanzees that are extremely vulnerable to infections from human beings, to the extent that when you actually go in on these expeditions, you go in wearing masks, and there is very strict rules of how much time you engage with them and the distance factor. And those are areas where I'd say the wildlife is extremely vulnerable. The numbers in terms of that are there, whilst it might seem that there's hundreds of gorillas in Central Africa or the Congo, the vulnerability of that wildlife is a cause for concern. So some of the responsible companies that operate up there have actually gone so far as to close off for the sake of the communities where there's very high populations, but also for the wildlife, because that could be passed on to the gorillas and wipe out entire populations. But certainly in Southern Africa, I have not heard or read anything that seems to suggest that might be an issue.
Oh, that's a relief. But that brings me to the idea or the question of how long are we expecting this to happen before tourism is back on the go again? I mean, are you, Bex, are you hunkered down for weeks, for months? What's the situation? What are you expecting to see here?
So Leslie, if I knew exactly when the storm would end, I would better plan the activities of our organization. But I think this is a very unknown quantum. When this all started, I think everybody thought, it will blow over in a couple of weeks and we'll be done. But what we've learned over the last few weeks, months, is that it's possible that this is here to stay. I think we have to make adjustments for the new normal. I don't think it's going to go away forever in the immediate term until vaccinations and treatments are actually discovered. But in the meantime, we feel that for at least the next 4 months, we don't expect that things will let up. So in other words, our curl-up period that we've described is really until the end of July. So that's for a 4-month period where we're hoping to be able to re-engage again with people visiting as of the 1st of August. Now, if that doesn't happen 1st of August, others have predicted that it might be longer, it might be 6 months, it might be until the end of the year. I think people in their minds are very keen to travel, but want to travel knowingly that their exposure is not to their detriment. So I think this mindset and the fear of the virus is something that we're also having to grapple with internationally and in fact globally. So to answer your question, from our point of view, we hope that the hunker down period is 4 months, but we're bracing ourselves for it to be a lot longer than that.
Golly, so have you got how far ahead do people plan these big safaris? Have you got bookings for June, July, that you're now having to advise people, tell people they can't come?
Yes, so we had a very busy May in our books for all the camps. We've got bookings all year round, and normally these bookings are set 6 to 12 months in advance. I mean, we're taking now, thankfully, bookings already for 2021. We're encouraging people to book ahead of time because tourism needs it. You know, the survival of tourism is the survival of these wilderness areas, the wildlife, and the communities that are sustained by tourism. So if I can also just weigh into the initial, at least the question on what can people do, you know, other than donations, which are extremely helpful from a cash perspective to both the Bloomy Hills Anti-Poaching Foundation and also to our foundation, is really getting people to focus on postponing their travels instead of canceling them, because that will help the tourism companies actually stay alive and help us divert some of those funds into saving these areas. It takes an enormous amount of capital to keep people employed, to keep communities motivated, and to keep them hopeful about being able to save the wildlife on their doorstep. So it's just one of the greater things that people can do as an audience is to postpone and reschedule their trips to further out. And certainly not just African bush camps, but many tourism organizations are giving very flexible terms in terms of being able to postpone your trip at no extra cost and to make sure that people take out that holiday that they've ever dreamt of.
It's strange, isn't it, to have someone actually putting a date on it? Not that you've put a definitive date, but we're living here under a lockdown that's supposedly until April the 16th. And then suddenly everything kumbaya, everything happens. It's not going to be like that, is it? I think we have to hunker down and be realistic. But there's going to be a lot of travel companies go bust, I imagine. I mean, that's going to have a devastating effect on the community. You're confident African bush camps can survive this period?
Look, thankfully, we have a very sound and robust management team. We have very strong and robust investor group. And we have planned for the worst case scenario, which is that if we factor in zero income between now and the 31st of December, we will still be able to engage with our employees. We'll still be able to engage with our communities and have a tourism business that we can continue to grow and take forward. But in order for that to happen, you know, we're not immune to the effects of the world economies, and neither is our investor. So I think it's very important that every bit of support that comes out from the trade, from people traveling, booking their future holiday, not canceling, will go a long way into not only our survival, but the survival of many good travel companies that are out there advocating for Africa.
And Orbit, can the foundation survive this much of a lockdown?
Oh yes. So a lot of our projects have really been based on the community participation. So in terms of the sustainability plan, it has really been to give the greater say and the greater participation from the community. We will, however, continue to require support, but we can foresee a situation where, for example, where we were already running a community garden, this is really being run by the community, where there was an income generating project. It's really about the groups looking for other markets that are not necessarily the camps. And hopefully the students who were on the scholarships will also go back and give back to their communities, because that has been a very important aspect of their support, to say we need them to be able to look back and support the communities. Would be quite happy if we can get a bit more support, particularly around the scholarships for the students, because as you can imagine, if there is a loss of income in most of the communities, and especially on the guardians or the parents, that also means we might end up having more students requiring support to access school. I mean, since they have to pay school fees here in Zim and in Zambia. So we would like to try and do that. But also, you know, there are a lot of interventions that we're hoping we can do with the communities that do not necessarily require a lot of funding. We've always tried to ensure that our operational costs are low, and African bush camps has committed to supporting these operational costs. So we need to be able to just look at the actual implementation, which is what we are focusing on now.
Okay, great. I've got a nice question here from Anton Kroon, who is a photojournalist for Getaway magazine in South Africa. And this ties in with something I'm also interested in. My question, before Anton's question, is when the lockdown finishes, do you think people are going to go, wow, phew, we're free, we can travel, let's go? Or will there be a contraction as people, will our world shrink almost as people decide they're going to stay at home to stay safe? And Anton's adding to that by saying, is wilderness travel likely to be the thing that benefits because there are less people around to catch a virus from? So do you think that it could have a knock-on effect in a way that brings more people to the wilderness once people can go anywhere? Or will we all stay at home scared? Who's going to start with that one? Bex, you go with that one, please.
So, Leslie, there's definitely a fear factor in this whole equation with the virus. So somebody recently quoted an article, it's called fear distancing as opposed to social distancing. And, you know, of course, there's a real threat to people's lives, people that are vulnerable. So I think initially a lot of people hold back and say, look, I'm going to play it safe. I want to stay at home until there's maybe perhaps a vaccination or at least there's some kind of treatment. But certainly just talking into Antoine's question, I think that we will see a definite rise in wilderness travel where people are going to remote areas without the crowds, exclusive places that are much smaller and people can actually interact, but you know, at a relatively safe distance, as opposed to areas that are congested with a lot more people where there's a much higher chance of them contracting the virus. So I think that there will be a shift in the style and in the way in which people actually view travel, particularly the market that we deal with.
And what's the your gut feeling about that, Mark? Do you think that people are going to be out and about again, or?
Absolutely, Leslie. I think human nature. Humans need to travel. They need to get out, and I don't see. You know, we'll overcome it. People will overcome their fears, and the virus will eventually end, as we've seen with other illnesses. And I don't see it being a major factor as time goes by. You know, with all the media hype and so on and so forth, at the moment everyone is running scared. But give it time, and as Beck says, I think we'll see probably travel return, but with a few extra precautions. I have no doubt about that.
Yeah. And Mark, what's your biggest concern for the animals, for wildlife right now? I mean, it's probably not a lack of people. I mean, we're seeing nature returning to the cities, so nature maybe is enjoying quite a bit of a breather from humans. But is there anything that could go wrong with the animals? What's your big concern for keeping the animals safe and nature safe at this stage?
I think it's just doing what we can, patrolling the areas, letting the poachers, the would-be poachers, know that we are still operating and we are still a force to be reckoned with. One of our other major concerns, which perhaps is a separate topic, is the human encroachment on wildlife land. But perhaps this is not where we should be discussing with this. But it's another major concern. Even greater than poaching, as far as I'm concerned. That'll probably, we'll have to look at that in the future. But yeah, as I say, we'll continue as we are operating with whatever means we have. So I'm hopeful, even though we are faced with these challenges, we will rise to meet them. There will always be someone to deal with them and assist on the ground. So I'm confident. We're here to stay. We're all here to stay. Zimbabweans are a very resilient people, and we'll deal with these issues and we'll get through them.
That's the Zimbabwe link. Bex, obviously you are also from Zimbabwe. Oh, but you're Zimbabwean too.
Yes, I am.
Yeah, okay. So you guys, I mean, Zimbabwe has been through some turmoil over the years, periods where tourists have stayed away completely, where the economy's tanked, and you're all still going. I mean, have the lessons of what you've seen in the past given you any indication of what to expect in the future, what fallout we are going to see from this virus? And any lessons that you've learned of past experiences?
Yeah, Leslie, I would say that what we're experiencing now is possibly what very few people in this current generation actually have ever experienced. So I think that whilst we as Zimbabweans have gone through a very difficult period economically, politically in the past, this experiencing that we're seeing now is very different from any other. But what I can say is that it's certainly given us some resilience to be able to stand up for it and say we're in this fight together, we're in it together, and we'll pass through it together. And that's really helped us just rally our teams along and bring them to a point where everybody's very positive and everybody is looking ahead and saying, how can we make this ride the most efficient ride during the periods of time, and how can we share the pain together? So I think, if anything, that's some of the positive things that have come out of the experiences that we've had previously.
And as for the foundation and the villages, there are other ways for these people to survive that aren't entirely dependent on tourism and the money from African bush camps. But you've got stuff going, like you're talking about the gardening. The gardens. So are you confident that the villages are going to be okay that you've been looking after?
Well, they will definitely be impacted, but I think they will pull through. We will continue to support them in the smallest way possible, given the current resources set up. But we certainly will pull through. I think for us, the biggest lesson maybe is ensuring that we continue to push the access to education, because we have seen the results that it's bringing for our local communities. And if you look at how the communities react around supporting construction of classrooms, supporting any school-related projects, this is something that they value a lot. So we'll continue to support that. We'll continue to go on the ground. As soon as we are able to travel, we'll take our officers back to the ground and be able to support them in a way. Because our biggest challenge at the moment, you find, is whereas in an urban setup, people are talking of continuing with school in terms of online education. There's nothing like that in the rural area. So we'll need to go on the ground with materials to support that. And a lot of these rural schools actually have challenges in terms of textbooks required. So we are planning to also go and support in that aspect.
A final question for you, Obert. Is this this sudden stoppage of the money and the lack of tourism, is that making you or giving you a chance to reevaluate what is most important for these communities? I mean, it must have been carrying on for years and years, running smoothly. Now suddenly there's a crisis. What's going to be the education? You say is going to be the big thing to concentrate on. Health, is that becoming more of an issue now?
Yes, definitely. I think, like we've always done in the past, when we are implementing such community projects, we basically go on the ground, we do a baseline, we sit with communities, we come up with, all the key aspects or challenges that they would like us to help support. And then we look at each option and evaluate it and be able to come with an intervention. But definitely and immediately, for most of those communities, will actually be supporting them in terms of education. Health, yes, a lot of the government-related interventions are focusing on health. So yes, we might support that a bit, but in terms of the child who is supposed to be in class, that's going to be, because nothing has really been said at the moment, that's going to be a sticking issue, and we would like to be ready to support that.
Mark, any final thoughts from you about what the intervening or the upcoming months and weeks are going to change for you or make you refocus on, or anything that you're hoping isn't going to happen?
Yeah, it's going to be a challenge. There's no doubt about it, but we've just got to keep focused, do what we do. Don't forget, we're on the ground. We've got to look after the resource for when everyone gets back. So we need all the support we can get. The wildlife needs us to manage them, look after them. So yeah, I would say to everyone out there, please give us your support, and let's all sit back eventually with a big sigh of relief when we get back to normal, and then we can all look back at this time as being part of history, hopefully.
Yeah, I'm not sure normal's going to be the same again, really. Hopefully, I mean, I'm going to be going, yeah, let's grab life. It's short. Let's make absolutely the most of it. Hopefully people will do that, Bex, and turn up. And are there any changes you're going to make? I mean, we've seen how easily one man being sick half a world away can suddenly just go so massively out of hand. Are there any changes that you're going to be making at your camps as a result of this, or is it going to be business as normal?
Thanks, Leslie. Well, as you suggest, there's no such thing as normal. I think there is going to be a new normal going forward, just in terms of how we do business, how we are on the ground. But certainly, what this situation has really highlighted to us is the need to make sure that our staff and our communities are really on board and are benefiting from what we're doing, because the mobilization and the way in which we've been able to get up into this curl-up period, we've been able to do it fairly quickly and with pretty much 100% support from our teams. And it's really been amazing how we've managed to mobilize the teams, and that rolls out onto our communities. So really, if anything, it just highlights the need to even do a lot more and engage a lot more with our communities and get that total buy-in in this war that we're waging, for our environment and also against our wildlife. So I think it's very important for us all to step back and actually realize that there is a quantum cost to doing that. And that's what we hope to get a lot of support from the trade, a lot of support from the end consumer that comes out to Africa, just in realizing how much it actually takes to get a whole community to mobilize a whole different civilization in nature to be able to save it and make sure that we can stand the course of time.
Excellent. Okay, well, I really hope once the quarantine's lifted, once the danger passes, everyone's going to decide the wilderness is a good place to be and come to Africa. Thank you very much, gents. We're going to wrap it up there. Thank you, everyone, for participating. I'm sorry I didn't get to enough of your questions. We'll share them and make sure that everyone gets an answer. Finally, then, Mark, Bex, Albert, thank you so much for your wisdom and your time, and brilliant that the internet connection held. Hey, that's also fabulous. Everyone who's online, if you have any more comments, please pop them on. If you've got any questions, if you'd like to see these safari talks become a regular thing, let us know. Give us a thumbs up and suggest some future topics. I mean, we were talking about some ideas now that would make great future topics, I think. And I know you have nowhere else to be right now, so maybe we should do this again. Okay, brilliant. Thank you all very much for participating. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.